George doesn't want that to happen either. The story doesn't want that to happen. Let's have positive experience.
Okay. Well, you remember how this works?
Yeah.
I always start by asking you 3 questions. And you answer, right. Let's practice that. Right.
Right.
And then, only 3 questions, and then you stop saying right. But only at the beginning, I'll ask those 3 questions and you answer right. After that, if at any point during the story something happens where I feel like, I don't know, our attention's going someplace else, I might go, hey, and you say ho. Since it is Christmas, ho seems to be the right answer. And if I say it loud, hey, and you say it loud, ho. If I say it soft, hey, you say it soft, ho. That kind of thing. Okay, let's practice. Hey. You say ho. Remember, you're Santa. Okay? Hey. Hey. I said it softer. You want to say it softer. Hey. If I say it sickly, you say it sickly. Hey. Hey. If I say it like I'm sneezing, you say it like you're sneezing. Hey. Excellent. Excellent. So you guys are with me. All right. So I'm going to tell you some stories. And you say right. I'm going to tell you some stories. They're lies. But not everything in them is false. Yeah, you can do that. Some people like to do it on their lap. Yeah, you got to pay attention here. Well, my friends, the place we're going to isn't this place. It's another place. It's the place where drums take us. You see, we're not traveling by train, plane, boat, skateboard, scooter, or even walking. We're not flying, swimming, digging. We're going by the drum. We are going down, down, down to the place where the stories live. We have arrived. I know you're probably saying, no, I think this looks just like that place we left, you know, that classroom. But it isn't. It's the place inside the classroom, below the classroom, above the classroom, within the classroom, all around the classroom, yet it is not the classroom. It is the place in between. You see, that's where the imagination hides, and where the stories linger, and where the dead come to visit us. You know, those people we talked about, the ones we love so much that aren't here with us. But around Christmas time, they say the veil is thin between this world and the next, and they come and visit. Just like, you know, that story where you leave out some cookies and some milk for Santa. You've heard of that, yes? Well, that kind of story always happens, and people will leave out oranges to remember the ancestors, to invite the ancestors. They'll burn the incense to invite the ancestors. And of course, I do this whole ritual at the beginning in order to connect with those who are going to speak through me as I tell the story. And on this particular occasion, the speaking is going to be about Saint Nick, or Saint Nicholas. That's who was known as Santa Claus before he became known as Santa Claus, which, by the way, comes from a word in Dutch meaning Sinterklaas. And it then, over time, transformed into Santa Claus. You're not drumming? You? I don't see you. You don't want to? Good job. You're good. You see? have two stories to tell you today. One involves Saint Nick or Saint Nicholas. You see, he was a saint, and his donkey. And the other one involves two children who lost their way and needed some help. Which one would you like me to start first with? They both maybe have Saint Nicholas. Do you want the one with the donkey, or do you want the one with the two children? With a raising of the hands, who wants the donkey? Who wants the two children? Donkey. Two children. Donkey. Two children. Now I'm going to ask you a quick question to get to know you. Every question I ask, if you agree with the answer, you raise your hand. How many people like peanut butter? Hands up, hands down. How many people like chocolate? Hands up, hands down. How many people like cinnamon? Hands up, hands down. How many people like hot dogs? Hands up, hands down. How many people like the lit camels? Hands up. I saw a few. You see? You didn't know that, did you? But there are some camel lickers among you. In the middle of the night, the camel is minding its own business. And suddenly there's a small child up against its leg going, blah, blah, blah. And I bet that was one of you. You got to be careful, though. They'll kick. They get very upset. Once there was, and once there was not, Saint Nicholas and his donkey. Yeah! You see, back then, in those times, Saint Nicholas didn't travel with reindeer. He actually traveled sitting on a little donkey. And this was a long tradition of donkeys, you see, because he lives almost eternally. He even lives in our time. And he lived way back when, but his donkeys, well, they continued to pass and change, though they all stayed in the family. They were a gray, silvery-looking, cute donkey, and each one, the great-grandfather, the father, the grandfather, the son, in the future, they're all similar, being gray and silver, and really kind. And wherever he went, he would travel on this little donkey. Well, one time in Germany, as he was moving his way through the landside in the area known as the province of Rhine, he came across a little town named Düren. And in this town, as he was coming into the outskirts of the town, why, he saw a little tiny chapel, a little tiny church, and people would come and go, like the two girls who came and stood up and went over and talked to the person at the door of the church, asking, is this the place? And he wouldn't direct, he would say, go over there, say a prayer, and then come back in. And they would return to the little chapel that St. Nicholas was arriving at. You may not know it, but in another time, in another place, Mr. Lula was the man standing at the door of the chapel to greet everybody and welcome them in, as he is doing now. Well, St. Nicholas, he walked in, it's not a big church. It was a little teeny, very humbly made church of wood. But you walk inside, and there was a little teeny altar and a place that you could sit and a place you could kneel, and people would come and go like this young man. You see, he came into the church, the little chapel. He sat down, and suddenly a phone rang, which was very strange, because back then there was no phone. But you see, in the chapel, the future would arrive, and certain strange things would happen. So you know. Well, before St. Nick was going into the little chapel, and the man who would greet us stepped out for a moment, and another door opened up, and the man returned. Give him a round of applause. You see, this is how it is in this little chapel. People come and they go, but every time they walk in, they feel like they're connecting to the higher by telephone. Was that God on the phone by chance? Oh, did you happen to get a direct line?
Definitely.
Oh, see, when you tell stories of St. Nick, why, the higher power comes and listens too. Well, anyway, he was sitting there, on his donkey, as he arrived, he got off the little donkey and he said, I'm going to go in and worship for a little bit. Stay right here. The grass is green. Have a bit of grass. And the donkey, he went, hee-haw. Can you do that? Hee-haw. Hee-haw. That's what he did. While the man came and went and came back and forth to make sure the place had some circulation of energy. Well, St. Nick, he went inside and he got still. Because around Christmas, as much as it is about buying things and getting gifts, it's also about becoming still and connecting with those you love. And when you do get still, sometimes you hear little bits of laughter and little bits of that little thing that we just heard. Those kinds of things happen when you get still. Well, when he was finished, he went back outside. Donkey. My donkey. He couldn't find it. It wasn't anywhere to be found. He went all the way around the little chapel. There was no donkey. Now this was, you can imagine, it's like if you have a pet, a dear animal that you've gotten connected with. Why, he got very nervous. What happened to my little donkey? Where did he go? Well, not too far away from him, he saw the fishermen along the shore were collecting their nets with the catch. And he went down to them and he said, can you help me find my donkey? And they recognized his kindness immediately. Just like you'll see, whenever you're kind, often people will hear a bell ringing. And that bell ringing indicates that there is some feeling and a need to respond to the person who is so kind, who's appeared before you. Can you help me find my donkey? And the fishermen gathered and they devised a plan. They lit up torches and they had what's known as a cow horn that could imitate pretty well that sound of ee-ah. And they went off with St. Nick looking everywhere. They went this way, they went that, they went up, they went down, they went around through the hills, through the potato fields nearby, looking, calling out with that sound. Hee-haw! Doors would open and shut, but nothing would happen. Another door would open and a kid would arrive, but it wasn't the donkey. Another girl showed up, but it was not the donkey. And while they were doing that, the sky became a bit gray. What? And the day was cold. And as they were searching, calling out, hee-haw, hee-haw. Sometimes they need help because one voice doesn't work. Could you help? Hee-haw, hee-haw, hee-haw. Even the pigs apparently were responding. You could hear them. I don't know what that is. A donkey doesn't do that. Well, just then, the snow began to fall. How many have been around snow?
I never went to school.
You know what's very interesting? Next time you're out there, if you listen when it's falling, when the snow is coming down, the big, thick flakes, you might hear a bell again. But then again, it could be the chapel bell that suddenly stops for some reason. It doesn't complete its little melody. Well, the snow was falling and they couldn't hear because as snow falls, it tends to eat the sound. Yeah. Yeah. Well, as they were doing that, all the children were hearing this sound and they ran out and they helped. They joined the search looking for the little donkey. You could hear the sound of horses clopping along. You see, but that wasn't the donkey. And just then, when they made the loudest sorts of hee-haws they could, hee-haw, hee-haw, hoping that he would hear that sound and realize that perhaps there was a whole bunch of donkeys there to receive him. The children and the fishermen holding the torches leaned in and peered through the gray and the falling snow and that silence, and everything became hushed. Shh. And then they saw him coming slowly out of the distance, appearing out of the gray. And as he approached, he could see the tall, portly figure of St. Nicholas, this beautiful, kind energy radiating. And the donkey, they could hear it now. Yaw, yaw. He was far away. Yaw. And as he got closer, yaw, yaw. And the children rushed up and they were making that yaw sound. They were so happy to see him. They gathered all around the little donkey, and as he started to keep walking towards St. Nick, and they directed him, and all the fishermen and other villagers showed up and gathered around. Why, St. Nick's heart burst open with this beautiful light of love, and his donkey too came up to him going, yaw, 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 and making very happy sounds, and he was dancing a little bit, and he was jumping around, and as he approached, St. Nicholas scratched him behind the ear, and the donkey got so happy, while another person joined them. The donkey got so happy. I know this sounds strange, but it happens in animals that love. He got so happy that he let drop, that is, the donkey let drop some fruits of digestion onto the white snow below. But then the miracle happened. You see, when the villagers went to look at the fruits of digestion that had fallen on the white snow below, they saw it was no longer fruits of digestion. It was big, round, spicy, rich, delicious pfeffernusse. Spicy, rich cookies. With a touch of powdered sugar on each of them that looked just like the snow. And from that point on, the villagers seeing the miracle every Christmas, and especially on December 6th, which is St. Nicholas Day, they cook the beautifully rich and spicy pfeffernusse. Because when you love someone and they love you, your load is lightened. Now I was hoping to bring you today some pfeffernusse, but I was coming down Parthenia and I hit this pothole. It knocked my car door open, and the big plate of pfeffernusse that I had flew out of the car, hit the ground, and some chubby squirrels ran up and looked at the little things, and at first thought they were fruits of digestion from something bigger than them, but then they all said, "It's pfeffernusse!" They grabbed them up and took them away. And so all I have to tell you is that story. And that is the end of that. Hee-haw. I know you like Harry Man, but it's Christmas. It's the holiday season. It's Hanukkah. It's this very special time of year. And I know that so many think about Santa that I thought on this occasion, here in December, just before you go on your break, that it would be important to think about this person that lives in everyone's imagination, this Santa Claus that comes, knowing who each of you are and able to bring you just the right gift. Now, sometimes it seems to me that the gifts you might get at Christmas, they're not necessarily the gift that I think Santa really gives, which is this feeling that you get of knowing that you, each of you, are very unique and very special. For you to know that and remember that, when sometimes you might have an older brother that says, "What's up, fool?" Or they use bad words and they call you names. Well, you sometimes forget who you are. Whereas Santa, he always remembers where you're going, who you are, where you've been, what sufferings. See, that's what people say, which is unfortunate. They go, "He's not real." Yeah, but I tell you, everything that is most precious is invisible. You can't see love. You can't see this feeling you have for your parents, your best friend, that feeling you have, that's invisible. But don't you agree that in your heart it feels very real? But it's invisible. And so I think Santa appears at that level. Some people do say they see him. And so it very well may be. But the thing is, I would really never say, even now at my age, I never say that he's not real because I can feel him at Christmas. Now here is a story that you'll also hear. Probably if we were able to meet the two children that I'm going to tell you about, if they were here today, they would probably tell you he is very real. So it's good to think about this story and hear what happened to them. You do it nicely. You're good, you're following me. Well, I'm talking not Nintendo time. I'm not talking PlayStation time. I'm not talking Xbox time. I'm not talking that time either. I'm not talking cell phone time. Do you know what time I'm talking about? Once upon a time. And that is the best kind of time. Once upon a time, there was a brother and sister. How old are you? 10?
I'm 9.
You're 9? 10? Excellent, 9 and 10. Well, this brother and this sister, they were actually 7. Now, how many of you have ever lost someone? They died. Have you ever had somebody die?
I have a dog, right?
Yeah.
Less talking, more listening.
That's good. See, it's a very hard experience to go through, but I think sometimes when we do and we lose someone we love, it opens our heart to those invisible things that we were talking about. Sometimes it's not that they die.
Attention students from room 48, please report to the library. All students from room 48 should be in the library. Thank you.
And all the students that are here to hear stories, well, you're already in that place, known as room 18, or the chapel, or the place where you are. where the imagination is real. This young boy and this girl one day lost their parents. And they became known. Sometimes when you lose both your parents, there is a word that has descended over time, and it's called orphan. One is an orphan when you lose your parents. Where this little brother and sister, they lost both their mother and father. And the villagers, feeling very sad for them, contemplated or thought about what they should do. Then one of the villagers remembered that they had an uncle that lived not too far away. So the villagers gathered up the very sad boy and girl and took them to be with their uncle. Now this uncle was very wealthy. He had many cattle, a big home, and inside great beautiful pieces of furniture. They handed the brother and sister into his care, thinking that they would be just fine. But as you probably know in your own life, sometimes people look very friendly, but on the inside, they have something of the rat in them. The rat! See, I can't just say it like they have a little bit of the rat in them. It doesn't work. You have to kind of give it the feeling. They have rat in them. Can you say that? They have rat. How many people have known people with a bit of the rat in them? Yes? Yes? Well, the moment the villagers left, the uncle looked at the two children who were smiling up at him with the best smile they could. And he looked and he said, they're too small to work. And they're not big enough to carry loads of things. And you know what he made them do?
What?
Maybe you've seen this. I'm from Venezuela originally, and I've actually seen this, and sometimes I've seen it downtown in Los Angeles. You'll see children on the street begging.
Begging?
They hold a cup, and sometimes it might be a homeless woman, and she has her children, and they're on the street, and she sends the children up to the cars or to the people walking by with the cup. And they look, and you can tell that they don't have a home because their clothes are beat up and a bit dirty, and there's something in their eyes of sadness. And they hold their cup up and they ask for money because maybe the mother can't find a job. But in this case, these two orphans, why, the uncle who had all of this, because they were too little to work and not big enough to carry big things, why, he sent them to beg. And of course, this was in a time in Greece where there were no cars or things like that. And so they would be in the plazas here and there where people would gather, and they would hold their little cups and spend the day trying to ask for what is known in Greece as drachmas, which is their money, their coins.
They're gold coins.
So they would stand there afraid, because if they came home without any money, why, their uncle would beat them.
What? Beat them? What's beat them?
As my grandmother would do in Venezuela sometimes. In this case, because it's Greece, they wouldn't, but to convey it to you, he'd break out the chancla.
Oh, yeah, chancla.
Yeah, see, you know what I'm talking about, a chanclazo. But in this case, it wasn't a chanclazo, it was a guamazo with the hand.
Wow, I know that.
Now, you and I, we're laughing, but you can imagine little 7-year-old brother and sister by themselves and unable to provide what the uncle wanted, and then they would get beaten. Well, every day this would occur. One day, they went out on a cold winter day, stood there freezing, their little bodies shaking, because they weren't wrapped in clothes enough, and they held the little cup in front of them, hoping that someone would pass by. On this particular day, a tall, handsome gentleman walked up to them and reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 large gold coins and dropped one in each of their and they held it and looked in their cup and couldn't. They felt the weight of the gold, and their faces radiated a kind of light that almost looked like a little torch, but it was their smile.
Who was he?
They knew that maybe that day they would go home and the uncle would finally be pleased. Well, at the end of the day, having really collected only those coins, they turned to head towards their uncle's home, and hiding along the side of the way were 3 teenage boys that had something of the rat in them. That's right. They had something of the in them. And the brother and sister, being kind and heart, did not see them coming, nor could detect the ratness in them. And the two tried to hold on to their money, but the teenagers shook them, took everything they had, and most particularly the gold coins. Well, they went home very, very quietly, trying not to make any noise, hoping that their uncle was asleep at that point. But sure enough, the moment they walked in, one of them hit something, made a creaking sound in the home. And the uncle stirred awake, who was sitting in a chair. "Did you bring me something?" They had nothing. And when he saw that, even though he had just been awakened from sleep, he stood up and he gave them a smacking like I can't even describe. Well, the 2 children didn't know what to do inside and outside. They were crying. They were crying tears that were coming down in the front of their face, but also their heart was crying, a kind of crying that maybe you've known at one moment or another in your life where you don't want to show exactly how sad you feel. Well, that's how they felt. And the uncle said, "You're no good to me." Neither of those 2. And neither of the children went, "What the?" like that kid in the back said. But I understand your feeling, because that's probably how they were feeling. They were like, "What the?" But in that case, they were feeling so sad that even those words of "what the," which would show some kind of oomph, right? They were like, you want to stand up. And I bet if you had been there with that uncle, you would have gone, "What the?" And you would have stood up and you would have made some fists and maybe fought back, right?
Yeah.
But in this case, it wasn't that way, because they had that kindness, and they were missing their parents, and they were all alone. And when the uncle kicked them out and they headed outside, because, well, that was the only way to go, run, and the door slammed behind them, they tried to find their way. They thought about that. I appreciate you saying that. They could have said they were sorry, but at that point they knew the uncle, no matter what they did, still would have said they were no good. They went this way. They went that way. They looked and looked, but it was the middle of the night. The wind was whipping around the homes. I don't know if you've ever felt that kind of loneliness, but imagine no parents in a place that you don't know, sent out in the middle of the night, in the middle of winter when it's cold. And as they were walking along, they saw in a distance a little church. Not exactly the same as that other one, but similar. They didn't know it yet, but that church was called the Church of St. Nicholas. And there was a light in the window, a burning candle, some sort of flame that was lighting up the inside. And they felt, well, wherever there's light, let us head towards the light. And they went inside holding hands, and they came and they saw on one of the far walls with a whole bunch, I don't know if you've ever seen them. In some churches they have that. It's like a little thing, a little metal, and they have a bunch of little candles.
Oh, yeah.
Well, right in front of this big, what it's called is called an icon. And what it is, in Greece, they'll have a painting of some important religious person. In this case, it was of St. Nicholas. And then around the shape of the person, instead of seeing a background like a countryside, it'll be all gold plated. It's like all, and it's raised. It's just in front, put on top of and around this image of St. Nicholas. Well, they had heard of him, and they had heard that he was a protector of orphans. And so they sat on church pews, a little one together next to each other, feeling the warmth of the place. And I'm not sure if it was because it was hotter inside or something special was in the air. They say sometimes that when love is present, a home feels warmer. Well, they sat there, and it's not like these lights of today. It was all candles. So imagine the flickering of the candles on the little votive stand in front, just below the icon of St. Nicholas, and off in different corners there were other candles, and they somehow felt comforted. Now here is the really unusual part. Remember when we were talking about that Santa's not real? Well, in this case, they didn't know if they were just so tired that maybe they were just seeing things. But he was dressed in a nice red, deep sort of purplish red robe. And they could swear at that moment that his hands were extending out of the painting. They thought they were seeing it. But what made it feel true was the smell of bread that suddenly moved through this little church. And as they looked more closely, in his hands he had 3 small loaves of bread. And he extended them out. And then they heard his voice. And he said, "Children, I know what has happened. Your uncle has a shut down heart. There is no use going back." And as he said that, that bell that often shows up spoke to confirm the truth of what was being said, and they knew in their hearts that it was so. There is no use going back. But he said, that is, this St. Nicholas, that is, this icon with the hands stretched out, having given them the bread into their small little cupped hands, he said, take this bread and go down. And he pointed that way. And you'll come to a house that has a candle lit in the window. Go knock on the door. There will be a kindly old woman. She will answer. Offer her one of the pieces of bread and say that St. Nicholas sent you to her. She will take you in and she will care for you. They bowed their heads. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but there's a word in English. It's called gratitude, which means dar gracias. It means to be thankful that things... Yes. You know, some people they take and they don't have that feeling. They go, I wanted the PSP, I wanted the PlayStation, and I got it. Right? Why didn't you give that to me? They'll still talk like that. But I think that St. Nicholas appeared and gave them that bread because they were kind and they had gratitude and they were thankful. So over the holidays, remember that any kindness that comes to you, whether it's a gift or somebody made you a hot chocolate or somebody didn't give you the chanclazo, then you can be thankful and have gratitude. Well, they went outside and they went down the path that he had pointed. And before leaving, by the way, they did also say thank you to him. And they went down and they came to a house. They knocked. And that bell rang again, which confirmed that it was the right house. A door opened. And an old woman and her friend... No. Two young boys that seemed something like the brother and sister stood there. Holding in their hands, they had the 3 pieces of bread. The young girl, who had some courage to her, said, St. Nicholas sent us, and he wanted you to have this. And the old woman smiled and understood what was happening here, that these 2 children needed a home. And she took them in, and she cared for them. Her home was very small. It had nothing of the furniture that uncle had had. It had no cattle around it or wealth in that manner, the way the uncle had had. But in spite of how small it was, I can tell you that the heart in there was bigger than anything they had ever seen. And to me, that is the real riqueza, the real riches. Well, she took good care of them, and every day at night they would go to the Church of St. Nicholas. They would sit quietly in front of the icon, and St. Nick would offer, with the beautiful, large, caring hands and that deep reddish purple robes, reach out and hand them 3 pieces of bread, and they would always take one home to the old woman, who again every day was kind and caring, pretty much like Mr. Lula and probably any other teacher you know. She had that kind of kindness. Well, then the strange thing happened. And maybe you know that your life is going along just fine, and then something surprising happens. The man, that is the uncle, the one with a bit of the rat. I'm sorry, he had what in him? He had a bit of the in him. Well, that's right. Who said that? Say it again. No, but you said it with a lot of feeling. He had a bit of the rata in him. That's right. The rata. See, when you speak only English, you only go rat. But see, in Spanish, you got all that feeling. You can go rata. Well, this man, to use a phrase that we use now, he had suddenly bit the dust, kicked the bucket, shed the mortal coil, dropped the robe, which basically means the man died. Well, the villagers found out about it, and they came to visit the young boy and girl now being raised by the kindly old woman. And the children heard that all that the man had owned, including that house and the nice furniture and all the cattle and the land, was now theirs. And so they moved to that home, but of course they brought the old woman with them. And their life continued on much the same way, except when they went to visit one day St. Nicholas in the icon in the church, he smiled and he said, "My children, you have no longer any need of bread from me, but always know that I am watching over you, and I will always help point the way." And they always felt that wherever they had an issue, a problem, something blocking their life, why they could consult within, and they could feel those hands extending out towards them, and his hand pointing, go this way, do that. You see, that's how St. Nicholas is. And from that point on, whenever they visited, they said thank you, but he didn't move. St. Nicholas in the painting, in the icon. But somehow, the moving that they no longer saw out there, why it was happening inside them. And I think that's how St. Nicholas is as well sometimes. You may not see him out there, but believe me, he's arriving and appearing when you need him inside. And all the good they did with all that wealth, well, I don't have the time to tell you. And if you're wondering about the old woman, why she lived out her days until she could no longer take care of them, and you know what? Then, in gratitude, they took care of her, giving her all this love, so that she lived to the end of her days feeling not lonely, feeling seen, feeling that she was being thanked, and that 2 children who are now grown would never forget her. Now, you might ask how I know of this story. Well, I had the occasion to visit a church of St. Nicholas not too long ago, and I could swear that as I was thinking about coming to tell you that story, and I was in front of a painting of St. Nicholas, that he extended to me a big loaf of bread. And he winked and brought out another one of epiphany. And I had both. And you already know what happened to the other one with the epiphany. But I had this nice, freshly baked bread. And I told Mr. Lula, I'm going to bring it to your class and anybody else who's in here. And I was coming down that Parthenia, that street that they never finished fixing. And I hit a second pothole. And I think I got to fix that passenger door because it bounced open. And that big bread, that big loaf of bread popped out. And there was this old woman walking by. And she sneezed. And that threw her arms forward. She went, ah! And she sneezed. And when her arms were like that, why, the bread, strangely having bounced out of my car, landed in her arms. And she went, ay, Dios mío. And I think that was true. I think that the great big Dios, through St. Nicholas, felt she needed the bread more than we do, because you and me, my friends, we have this story. And that is the end of that. Well, I hope you have a wonderful holiday. If you're celebrating Christmas, may it be full of love and light. If you're celebrating another thing like Hanukkah, may it also be full of light. I gotta put it all away. You're welcome.